This is not an accident. The moment you pressed play was not random, not casual, not the result of an algorithm guessing correctly. It was a point of resonance. Something in your internal state matched something encoded here, and the field responded by collapsing this encounter into your experience. That is how reality actually moves. Not through coincidence, but through frequency recognition. You are not here because you were searching. You are here because your inner state was already broadcasting the signal that corresponds to this message. Long before the conscious mind forms questions, the field is already responding. This is why certain things appear at precise moments, and why others never do. Reality does not arrive based on what you think you want. It arrives based on what you are being. This reframes everything. You are not a passive observer scrolling through an external world. You are a selecting mechanism. Your inner coherence, your emotional baseline, your unspoken assumptions about self and reality are continuously instructing the quantum field. The field does not decide for you. It mirrors you. And this video appearing now is evidence of that mirroring in action. When something truly aligns, it feels familiar before it feels new. There is a quiet recognition, not excitement, not urgency. A sense of, this was inevitable. That feeling is not emotional entertainment. It is resonance. It is the signal that your current frequency has reached a point where certain information, perspectives, and realizations can now exist in your awareness without resistance. Nothing is being given to you here. Something is being revealed that matches where you already are. That is why forcing never works. That is why chasing information keeps it distant. And that is why recognition changes everything instantly. The moment something is recognized, it was already aligned. The quantum field does not respond to words, affirmations, or effort. It responds to coherence. It responds to the state you return to when no one is watching. It responds to what feels normal to you. And right now, what feels normal has shifted enough for this message to be accessible. This does not make you special in the way the ego wants. It makes you precise. It means your frequency has reached a point of readiness. Readiness is not effort. It is alignment. It is the absence of inner contradiction. And from that absence, reality reorganizes itself quietly and efficiently. You are not being asked to believe anything yet. Belief comes later, if at all. All that matters now is noticing. Noticing that this moment is happening. Noticing that you are here. Noticing that something is already responding to you without force. This is how the field communicates. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But through timing, relevance, and recognition. If you are aligned with this frequency, subscribe and remain within it. Most people are taught that reality responds to intention. Set a goal. Focus harder. Repeat the words. Push until something moves. But if intention were the true driver, effort would always be rewarded. And yet you have already seen that this is not how reality behaves. Some things arrive without effort. Others resist no matter how much force is applied. This inconsistency is not a flaw in reality. It is a misunderstanding of what reality is responding to. The field does not respond to what you say you want. It responds to the state you are occupying while wanting it. Intention is a surface signal. State is the carrier wave. And the carrier wave is what the field locks onto. You can intend abundance while living in tension. You can intend connection while holding contraction. You can intend clarity while remaining internally fragmented. In those cases, the field follows the deeper instruction, not the spoken one. This is why repetition without alignment creates exhaustion instead of results. You are sending mixed signals, and the field always resolves in favor of coherence. State is not mood. It is not fleeting emotion. It is the underlying orientation of your nervous system, your sense of self, your relationship to uncertainty. It is what you return to when nothing is happening. That baseline is constantly instructing the quantum field, whether you are aware of it or not. This is where responsibility is often misunderstood. Responsibility does not mean blame. It does not mean you did something wrong. It means you are the source of the signal. And being the source is not a burden. It is liberation. Because what is sourced internally can be stabilized internally, without fighting the world. The field is precise, but it is not personal. It does not reward effort or punish hesitation. It simply reflects the most stable signal available. If your internal state is rushed, reality mirrors delay. If your internal state is lacking, reality mirrors absence. Not because you deserve it, but because that is the instruction being broadcast. This is why trying to override state with willpower rarely works. Willpower is temporary. State is continuous. The field does not respond to peaks. It responds to consistency. And consistency is born from identity and emotional orientation, not motivation. When this is seen clearly, the pressure to force outcomes begins to dissolve. You no longer need to micromanage reality. You begin to notice yourself instead. The way you breathe when nothing is wrong. The way you hold uncertainty. The way you relate to time when no one is watching. These are not small details. They are the primary inputs. Nothing needs to be fixed here. Awareness alone begins to recalibrate the signal. The moment you stop arguing with your current state, it starts to soften. The moment you stop pretending to feel aligned, alignment becomes possible. This is not effort. This is honesty. Reality is not waiting for better intentions. It is responding now, to what is already present. And the more clearly this is recognized, the less you try to convince the field of anything at all. You begin to understand that creation is not about asking louder. It is about becoming quieter, until the true signal can finally be felt. Emotion is not a reaction to reality. It is the interface through which reality is selected. What you feel is not commentary on what is happening. It is data. It is feedback. It is the field responding to the signal you are broadcasting and informing you, moment by moment, whether you are aligned with it or resisting it. Most people were taught to suppress emotion, justify it, or analyze it endlessly. But emotion was never meant to be interpreted as a story. It is a frequency state. A measurable orientation of consciousness. And like any interface, it communicates in simple terms. Expansion or contraction. Openness or resistance. Coherence or distortion. Expansion does not mean happiness. Contraction does not mean failure. These are not moral categories. Expansion is the felt sense of alignment, where energy moves without friction. Contraction is the signal of misalignment, where energy compresses and becomes dense. Both are guidance. Both are necessary. Neither is wrong. The confusion begins when emotion is treated as something caused by the external world. As if circumstances generate feeling, and feeling follows events. In truth, the relationship is reversed. The emotional state precedes the event. The field mirrors that state, and the reflection is mistaken for the cause. This is why two people can experience the same situation and have entirely different outcomes. The situation is neutral. The emotional frequency entering it is not. The field does not respond to the surface event. It responds to the emotional instruction embedded within it. Emotion is not something to manage. It is something to listen to. Not with analysis, but with presence. When contraction appears, it is not asking to be eliminated. It is asking to be acknowledged. The moment it is allowed, without judgment, it begins to release. This is not psychology. This is physics. Resistance increases density. Allowing restores flow. Expansion, likewise, is not something to chase. The moment you attempt to recreate it, it collapses. Expansion arises naturally when the internal state is coherent. When you stop arguing with what is. When you stop trying to be somewhere else. It is the body's recognition that the signal is clean. Emotion, then, becomes a navigational instrument. Not a problem to solve, but a compass to trust. When you feel ease, reality is confirming alignment. When you feel tension, reality is pointing to contradiction. The mistake is trying to override the signal instead of refining it. The quantum field is not distant. It is intimate. It is responding continuously, and emotion is the language through which you feel that response. Ignoring emotion does not silence the signal. It only removes conscious access to it. And when access is removed, creation becomes unconscious. As this becomes clear, you stop trying to feel better and start trying to feel honestly. You stop demanding expansion and start noticing coherence. You stop resisting contraction and start extracting information from it. This changes the relationship entirely. Emotion is not weakness. It is precision. It is the bridge between the unseen and the seen, the internal and the external, the signal and the reflection. And once you recognize it as such, reality stops feeling unpredictable. It starts feeling responsive. Before anything can be understood clearly, one assumption must dissolve. Reality is not listening to you. It is not evaluating your requests, weighing your worth, or deciding whether you deserve a response. The quantum field does not operate through interpretation. It operates through reflection. What you experience is not a reply to what you ask for. It is a mirror of what you are coherently broadcasting. This distinction matters because listening implies judgment. Reflection implies precision. The field does not misunderstand you. It does not misread your desires. It simply reflects the most stable signal available. And that signal is never your words. It is never your affirmations. It is the internal coherence, or incoherence, you are living inside of. The field is neutral. Completely neutral. It does not prefer positive over negative, spiritual over material, confident over doubtful. It responds to clarity. When a signal is clean, the reflection is clean. When a signal is fragmented, the reflection is fragmented. This is not punishment. It is mechanics. Most frustration comes from believing the field should behave differently than it does. People speak intentions while holding contradiction. They visualize outcomes while inhabiting urgency. They demand change while internally rehearsing the absence of it. The field does not average these signals. It follows the dominant one. The most consistent one. The one you return to when effort fades. Reflection also explains why reality often feels repetitive. The same patterns, the same delays, the same types of interactions appearing again and again. This is not fate looping. It is reflection remaining accurate. Until the signal changes, the mirror has nothing new to show. This is where clarity becomes power. Not control. Not manipulation. Clarity. The moment you stop asking reality to be different and start observing what it is showing you, the relationship shifts. You are no longer arguing with the mirror. You are reading it. The field does not need to be convinced. It does not need more emotion, more force, more visualization. It needs coherence. And coherence is quiet. It is stable. It does not oscillate between hope and doubt. It does not spike and crash. It simply is. When this is recognized, the external world stops feeling antagonistic. Events no longer feel like obstacles. They feel like information. Every reflection becomes feedback. Not about what you did wrong, but about what signal is currently dominant. This is also why change can happen suddenly. When coherence stabilizes, the reflection updates immediately. There is no delay built into the system. Delay only appears when the signal itself is unstable. Nothing here is mystical. It is elegant. Simple. Exact. The field reflects. Always. Without commentary. Without preference. Without pause. If this recognition is landing, like the video now as a confirmation that this recognition has landed. Control feels like safety, but it is actually mistrust in disguise. The impulse to control arises when the internal state does not trust the field to respond without force. And the moment that mistrust appears, coherence begins to fracture. This is why control does not accelerate creation. It collapses it. When you try to control an outcome, you are signaling that the present moment is insufficient. That signal carries urgency, tension, and resistance. The field does not interpret the reason for that tension. It simply mirrors the instability itself. What returns, then, is not the desired result, but more conditions that require management, effort, and correction. Control assumes that reality must be pushed into shape. Allowing recognizes that reality reorganizes naturally when the signal is clean. These are not philosophical differences. They are energetic states. Control tightens the signal. Allowing stabilizes it. Effort, when driven by fear of absence, fragments coherence. One part of you is moving toward the desired outcome. Another part is bracing for disappointment. Another is monitoring progress. These internal divisions send multiple instructions simultaneously. The field resolves this by reflecting delay, complexity, or inconsistency. Not as punishment, but as accuracy. This is why timelines collapse under control. A timeline requires stability to remain accessible. When your internal state oscillates between forcing and doubting, the signal cannot hold. The timeline dissolves before it can fully organize. What remains is motion without arrival. Allowing is often misunderstood as passivity, but it is the opposite. It is active trust. It is the state in which action arises without resistance. When you are allowing, movement feels obvious, not pressured. Decisions feel clear, not urgent. There is effort, but it is not heavy. It does not pull against itself. Control tries to manage every variable. Allowing recognizes that most variables are already accounted for by the field's intelligence. The field is not chaotic. It is responsive. But it only responds to coherence, not micromanagement. The more you attempt to control timing, people, or conditions, the more you reinforce the belief that something is wrong now. That belief becomes the dominant signal. The field mirrors it faithfully. This is why people feel stuck despite constant action. They are reinforcing the frequency of correction rather than the frequency of completion. When control releases, something subtle happens. The nervous system relaxes. Attention returns to the present moment. The signal stabilizes. In that stability, timelines can form and hold. Events begin to line up without orchestration. Not because you stopped caring, but because you stopped interfering. This is not about doing nothing. It is about doing without resistance. Without inner contradiction. Without the background noise of mistrust. When action emerges from coherence, it amplifies the signal instead of distorting it. The field does not need to be dominated. It needs to be met. And it is met not through force, but through alignment. Control collapses timelines because it fractures the very signal required to sustain them. Allowing restores that signal by removing the internal struggle. When this is recognized, effort becomes lighter. Outcomes become cleaner. And reality begins to move with you, instead of against you. Nothing needs to be activated. This is the misunderstanding that keeps effort alive. The belief that something is dormant, locked, or waiting to be triggered creates endless seeking. But the field does not require activation. It requires recognition. And recognition is immediate. Techniques promise access later. Practices promise progress. Systems promise results if you do them correctly and long enough. But all of these rest on the same assumption, that you are currently not enough, not aligned, not ready. That assumption becomes the signal. And the field mirrors it by keeping the result just out of reach. Recognition works differently. Recognition does not add anything. It removes what was never required. The moment something is clearly seen, without argument, without resistance, the field reorganizes around that clarity. This is why understanding can feel like relief rather than excitement. The system relaxes because it is no longer compensating for confusion. You do not activate alignment. You notice it. You do not activate clarity. You stop contradicting it. You do not activate readiness. You recognize that readiness has already occurred, otherwise this moment would not be happening. This is why change often happens without effort. Someone hears a sentence, sees a pattern, or finally notices something obvious that was previously overlooked. Nothing was done. Yet everything shifts. That is recognition. And the field responds instantly because the signal has stabilized. Striving introduces delay because striving implies absence. It keeps attention oriented toward a future state, reinforcing the belief that the present is insufficient. Recognition collapses that distance. It brings attention fully into now. And creation only happens now. There is no technique that can replace honesty. There is no practice that can override contradiction. You cannot perform your way into coherence. You can only stop pretending to be incoherent. The field is already responding to who you are being. Recognition simply allows you to see that clearly. This is also why forcing awareness fails. You cannot make yourself recognize something. Recognition happens when resistance ends. When the mind stops arguing. When the nervous system softens. When the need to become something dissolves. Recognition does not feel dramatic. It feels simple. Almost too simple. And because it lacks drama, it is often dismissed. But simplicity is the signature of coherence. The field responds most efficiently to signals that are clean and uncomplicated. When recognition occurs, there is nothing to maintain. No ritual to repeat. No state to protect. Coherence sustains itself when it is no longer questioned. This is why real change feels stable rather than fragile. You are not waiting for activation. You are waiting to stop seeking it. And that waiting ends the moment you see it. If this recognition is happening now, comment with the words, "I am ready," to anchor this timeline. Everything discussed so far leads here. Without this understanding, creation is always postponed. With it, delay collapses. Creation never happens later. It never waits for improvement, preparation, or a better version of you. Creation happens only now, because now is the only point where the signal exists. The idea of later is a psychological construct, not a creative one. Later is where the mind places resolution so it does not have to fully inhabit the present. But the quantum field does not operate in conceptual time. It responds to the state that is active. And only one state is ever active at once. The one you are in now. Future-based thinking feels productive, but energetically it is absence-oriented. It signals that fulfillment is elsewhere, that alignment is pending, that readiness is conditional. The field does not interpret the content of those thoughts. It mirrors the orientation behind them. An orientation away from now produces outcomes that never quite arrive. This is why waiting feels heavy. Why anticipation carries tension. Why planning without presence creates fatigue. These are not emotional flaws. They are feedback. The body recognizes that attention has left the only creative point available. Creation does not occur when circumstances finally align. Circumstances align when the internal state stops postponing itself. The moment you stop needing a future condition to validate the present, coherence stabilizes. And when coherence stabilizes, reality reorganizes immediately. This does not mean you abandon direction. Direction exists, but it is not projected into later. It is embodied now. You are not moving toward alignment. You are either aligned or you are not, and that alignment is always measurable in the present through emotional tone, nervous system state, and inner stillness. Delay is not caused by external obstacles. It is caused by a signal that says, "Not yet." That signal may be subtle. It often disguises itself as patience, realism, or responsibility. But beneath it is the same instruction: completion is not allowed now. The field honors that instruction precisely. When this is seen, urgency begins to dissolve. So does procrastination. Both are forms of future fixation. One rushes toward later. The other avoids it. Neither is present. And neither can create. Presence is not intensity. It is not force. It is availability. It is the absence of mental rehearsal. It is the body settling into now without needing it to be different. From that state, action becomes obvious. Not because you planned it, but because resistance is gone. This is why recognition is instantaneous. The moment something is seen clearly, it is seen now. And the field updates now. There is no waiting period built into reality. Waiting only exists when the signal is conflicted. You do not need more time. You need less deferral. Less mental relocation. Less postponement of permission. Creation is not ahead of you. It is beneath your attention. When you fully arrive here, even briefly, something shifts. Not because you did something, but because you stopped leaving. And from that still point, reality responds with the same immediacy you finally allowed yourself to occupy. Contrast is not a mistake in the system. It is the system refining itself. What feels unwanted is not evidence of misalignment in the way most people assume. It is evidence that alignment is becoming more precise. Contrast appears when frequency is sharpening, not when it is failing. The field does not punish. It clarifies. And it clarifies through experience. When something feels heavy, frustrating, or resistant, it is not reality pushing against you. It is reality showing you exactly where coherence breaks down. Without contrast, refinement would be impossible. You would have no reference point. No feedback. No way to distinguish resonance from distortion. Most suffering comes from misinterpreting contrast as rejection. When an outcome does not arrive, when a situation feels uncomfortable, the mind assumes something went wrong. That assumption creates resistance. Resistance adds density. Density prolongs the experience. Not because contrast is persistent, but because it is being argued with. Contrast is neutral information. It reveals what does not match your current frequency so that it can be released. It shows you what you are no longer meant to carry. It exposes subtle attachments, outdated identities, and unconscious expectations that no longer align with where you are moving. When contrast is allowed, it passes quickly. When it is resisted, it solidifies into patterns. The field continues to present the same signal until it is acknowledged. This is not cruelty. It is efficiency. The mirror remains accurate until the image changes. Alignment is not proven by constant ease. It is proven by responsiveness. When contrast appears and you can remain present without collapsing into blame or urgency, the frequency refines rapidly. You do not need to fix the contrast. You need to read it. Every unwanted experience is asking a simple question: is this still coherent with who you are being? If the answer is no, the experience dissolves once that recognition stabilizes. If the answer is yes, resistance drops and the experience shifts internally, even if external circumstances take time to reorganize. Contrast also prevents stagnation. Without it, identity would calcify. Desire would remain vague. Frequency would blur. Contrast sharpens intention by removing what is unclear. It forces precision, not through effort, but through experience. This is why people who avoid discomfort often feel stuck. Not because they are doing something wrong, but because they are avoiding refinement. Expansion requires contrast the way vision requires shadow. Without it, depth disappears. The key is not to seek contrast, nor to fear it. It is to stop personalizing it. Contrast is not about you. It is about coherence. When you stop interpreting contrast as failure, it loses its charge. When it loses its charge, it stops repeating. You do not need to be positive about contrast. You need to be honest with it. Honesty allows the frequency to adjust naturally. Pretending to be aligned while feeling contracted creates distortion. Acknowledging contraction without judgment restores flow. Contrast is the field's way of fine-tuning the signal. It is not an obstacle on the path. It is the path becoming clearer. And when you stop fighting it, alignment no longer feels fragile. It feels exact. Allowing is often misunderstood because it is described as something you do. In truth, allowing is something you stop doing. It is not an action applied to the world. It is an internal condition that removes interference from the signal you are already broadcasting. When people try to allow, they usually perform it as behavior. They step back, wait, or suppress their impulses. But behavior is not the source. The source is state. You can stop acting and still be internally resistant. You can appear calm while remaining tense. The field does not respond to outward stillness. It responds to inner coherence. Allowing is the state in which there is no argument with the present moment. That does not mean you like the moment. It means you are not trying to escape it mentally. There is no background negotiation. No silent demand that reality hurry up or change first. In that absence of resistance, the signal stabilizes. This is why allowing cannot be forced. The moment you try to allow, you introduce effort. Effort implies something is wrong. That implication becomes the dominant signal. Allowing arises naturally when the nervous system no longer perceives threat in the present moment. It is the body's permission to be here without defense. Passivity is different. Passivity is resignation. It carries contraction and suppressed frustration. Allowing carries neutrality. It feels open, not collapsed. There is space in it. From that space, movement emerges without strain. When allowing is present, action does not stop. It becomes precise. You act because something is clear, not because something is missing. You move because the next step is obvious, not because you are trying to escape discomfort. This is why action taken from allowing feels lighter and more effective. The mind often resists allowing because it fears loss of control. But control was never real. It was compensation for mistrust. Allowing does not remove direction. It removes friction. Direction remains, but it is no longer driven by urgency. Allowing also reveals timing. When resistance is gone, timing becomes intuitive. You no longer rush ahead or lag behind. You meet events as they arise. This is not luck. It is coherence. The field responds immediately to allowing because allowing removes noise. When the signal is no longer distorted by internal struggle, the reflection becomes clean. Things do not necessarily happen instantly, but they begin to organize without obstruction. You cannot maintain allowing through discipline. The moment it becomes a task, it collapses. Allowing sustains itself when you stop monitoring it. When you stop checking whether it is working. When you stop trying to hold it in place. This is why allowing feels simple when it is real. Almost ordinary. Nothing dramatic happens internally. There is just less tension. Less commentary. Less mental pressure. And in that simplicity, coherence becomes stable. Allowing is not giving up. It is giving reality permission to respond accurately. When you no longer interfere with the signal, the field does what it has always done. It reflects. Cleanly. Precisely. Without delay. Before this can be understood clearly, one habit of thinking must dissolve. Reality does not move forward in a single line. It branches. Constantly. What you experience as your life is not a path unfolding over time. It is a timeline you are currently occupying. And you did not attract it. You matched it. Timelines are not events waiting to be pulled toward you. They are already existing configurations of probability. Each one corresponds to a specific identity state. When your internal coherence stabilizes around a particular way of being, you naturally occupy the timeline that matches it. No effort is required. No attraction is happening. Occupation is automatic. This is why trying to manifest specific events often fails. Events are downstream effects. They are surface expressions of deeper identity coherence. When you focus on events without addressing identity, you are attempting to access a timeline without meeting its requirements. The field responds by keeping that timeline inaccessible. Identity here does not mean personality traits or social labels. It means the internal reference point you live from. What feels normal to you? What you expect without thinking? What you assume about how reality responds? These assumptions are not verbal. They are embodied. And the field treats them as coordinates. When identity shifts, timelines change instantly. Not symbolically. Literally. You find yourself having different conversations, noticing different opportunities, encountering different versions of people. Nothing dramatic announces the shift. It simply feels like reality has quietly rearranged itself. Because it has. This also explains why effort cannot bridge timelines. You cannot force yourself into a timeline that does not match your identity coherence. Any temporary movement created by willpower collapses as soon as attention relaxes. The system always resolves back to the most stable state. Occupying a timeline feels effortless because there is no internal contradiction. Your actions make sense. Your decisions feel obvious. Resistance is minimal. When you are in the wrong timeline for your current frequency, everything feels heavy. Even simple things require negotiation. There is no hierarchy of timelines. No better or worse ones in a moral sense. There are only matched and unmatched states. The field does not reward ambition. It responds to coherence. The more coherent your identity, the fewer timelines you oscillate between. This is also why trying to copy someone else's outcome rarely works. You are seeing an event without occupying the identity that sustains it. Without that identity, the timeline cannot hold. Imitation collapses because coherence is missing. When you stop trying to attract and start noticing what you are consistently being, clarity returns. You realize that your current timeline is not happening to you. It is happening through you. And the moment you become honest about that, change becomes simple. You do not need to jump timelines. You need to stabilize identity. The rest happens automatically. The field does not need instructions. It needs consistency. Once this is seen, seeking fades. You are no longer chasing futures. You are refining presence. And as presence refines, timelines reorganize without effort, without struggle, and without delay. Identity is the quiet axis around which all probability turns. It is the true point of control, though it rarely feels like control at all. Not because it is hidden, but because it is assumed. Identity is what you take for granted about yourself and reality. It is the lens you look through so consistently that you forget it is there. Most people try to control outcomes. They manage behavior, optimize strategy, adjust circumstances. But outcomes are secondary effects. They are downstream expressions of identity coherence. When identity is unstable, control becomes frantic. When identity is stable, control becomes unnecessary. Identity is not what you say you are. It is what feels normal. It is what you expect without effort. It is the level of ease or resistance you unconsciously accept as baseline. The field responds to that baseline, not to aspirations layered on top of it. This is why change that does not include identity rarely lasts. You can force new habits, new environments, new goals. But if identity remains unchanged, the system eventually corrects. Old patterns return. Old probabilities reassert themselves. Not because you failed, but because the signal did not fundamentally shift. Identity governs probability by narrowing what feels possible. Not intellectually, but energetically. Certain options never register because they do not match self-concept. Others feel inevitable. This is not imagination. It is selection. The field organizes around what you are prepared to sustain. Trying to control identity through affirmation or performance creates contradiction. You cannot convince yourself into coherence. Identity shifts when assumptions dissolve, not when new labels are added. The moment you stop arguing for who you are supposed to be, who you are becomes clearer. This is also why identity feels sticky. It is reinforced by repetition, emotional familiarity, and nervous system memory. The body remembers what the mind tries to outgrow. That does not mean change is slow. It means change happens when safety is restored, not when pressure is applied. True control, then, is not manipulation. It is refinement. It is noticing where identity is fragmented, defended, or compensating. It is seeing where effort exists and asking why. Effort often points to identity misalignment, not lack of discipline. When identity stabilizes, probability reorganizes quietly. Opportunities appear without being chased. Relationships shift without confrontation. Decisions feel obvious rather than heavy. This is not luck. It is coherence becoming visible. You do not need to control reality. You need to stop misidentifying yourself. The field responds faithfully to who you believe yourself to be at a cellular level, not who you hope to become. Identity is always active. Even now. And because it is active, it can be refined. Not through force, but through recognition. When you see what you have been assuming, the assumption loosens. When it loosens, the signal changes. This is the only control that matters. Not control over events, but clarity over self. From that clarity, outcomes no longer need to be managed. They organize themselves around the most stable version of you available. Possibility exists everywhere, but possibility alone does nothing. The field is saturated with potential, yet only a fraction of it ever becomes experience. What collapses possibility into form is not desire, not effort, and not intensity. It is stability. Specifically, the stability of frequency and identity. Instability keeps reality in flux. When your internal state fluctuates, outcomes fluctuate with it. Peaks of excitement followed by valleys of doubt create motion without arrival. The field reflects this by keeping things unresolved. Not withheld, but unformed. Possibility remains open because the signal never settles. Stability is what allows collapse. When an internal state becomes consistent enough, the field no longer has conflicting instructions to reconcile. Probability narrows. Options reduce. Form emerges. This is not because something was finally earned, but because the signal became coherent enough to hold structure. Intensity is often mistaken for power. Strong emotion feels productive. High motivation feels creative. But intensity is unstable by nature. It spikes and fades. It cannot sustain a timeline. Calm certainty, by contrast, does not fluctuate. It does not need reinforcement. It does not demand reassurance. And because it is steady, the field can organize around it. Calm certainty does not mean confidence in the conventional sense. It is not bravado. It is not self-assurance that needs to be maintained. It is the absence of internal argument. A quiet knowing that does not need to be defended. This state carries very little emotional noise, which is precisely why it is effective. When frequency stabilizes, identity stabilizes with it. You stop oscillating between versions of yourself. Decisions become cleaner. Reactions soften. Attention stops scattering. This coherence is immediately readable by the field. And the field responds by reducing randomness. This is why things sometimes, suddenly, fall into place after a period of stillness. Nothing new was added. Something stopped fluctuating. The signal reached a threshold where form could occur without distortion. Many people sabotage this moment by reintroducing intensity. They check, monitor, doubt, or rush. That reintroduces instability. Possibility opens back up. Form dissolves. This is not failure. It is feedback. Stability is not something you hold. It is something that happens when you stop interfering. The more you try to maintain a state, the more you introduce effort. Effort introduces tension. Tension destabilizes frequency. Stability collapses. This is why the most powerful creators appear relaxed. Not because they do not care, but because they are no longer negotiating internally. Their identity has settled. Their frequency is consistent. The field responds by matching that consistency externally. You do not need to chase form. You need to become less volatile. Less reactive. Less divided. When your internal state stops shifting, reality stops hesitating. Possibility is infinite, but form is selective. It selects based on stability, not desire. And when you understand this, you stop trying to generate intensity and start cultivating coherence. In that coherence, outcomes do not feel dramatic. They feel natural. Almost obvious. As if they were always going to happen once the signal finally stayed still long enough to be reflected. Before this point, the language has been about signals, states, and fields as if there were two things interacting. You and something external. But that distinction was only provisional. It was a way to orient understanding. Now it dissolves. You are not in the field. You are the field. What you call the quantum field is not an environment surrounding you. It is the totality of experience arising within consciousness. There is no boundary where you end and the field begins. That boundary was conceptual, not real. It existed only to make discussion possible. The sense of being a separate observer, located inside a body, looking out at an external world, is a perceptual habit. Useful, but incomplete. When examined closely, it does not hold. Everything you experience, including the idea of yourself, appears within awareness. And awareness itself has no edge. This is why the field responds instantly. There is no distance to cross. No message to send. No mechanism translating inner to outer. What you call response is simply awareness reorganizing its own contents based on coherence. The subject-object split dissolves here. There is no subject influencing an object. There is only consciousness recognizing different configurations of itself. Frequency is not something you emit into the field. Frequency is the pattern of awareness you are currently stabilizing as experience. This changes the meaning of control entirely. Nothing is being controlled because nothing is separate. What changes is recognition. When consciousness recognizes itself as primary, the need to manipulate appearances falls away. Appearances reorganize naturally because the underlying coherence has shifted. This is why effort was never required. Effort only exists when there is a perceived gap between self and reality. When that gap collapses, effort loses its function. Action still occurs, but it is not driven by lack. It arises as movement within the same field. You are not observing reality. You are experiencing reality as yourself. And yourself is not a person inside the experience. It is the space in which the experience appears. This is not philosophy. It is directly verifiable. Every sensation, thought, and perception arises in the same place. Awareness. When this is seen, identity becomes transparent. You can still use it. You can still operate as a person. But you are no longer confined to it. The sense of pressure eases because there is nothing to defend. Nothing to become. Nothing to maintain. The field no longer feels like something to align with. Alignment is inherent. Misalignment was only a misunderstanding of position. You were never out of place. You were only identifying with a fragment of what you are. This recognition does not create fireworks. It creates stillness. A quiet intimacy with everything happening. The world feels closer, not farther. Simpler, not grander. You are not a consciousness inside a universe. You are the consciousness in which the universe is appearing. And from that recognition, everything that follows reorganizes without instruction. Nothing has changed. And yet everything is different. When seeking ends, something fundamental relaxes. Not because a goal was achieved, but because the tension that required a goal dissolves. The seeker was never moving toward truth. The seeker was maintaining distance from it. And when that movement stops, reality does not need to be managed anymore. It reorders itself naturally. Seeking is subtle. It hides inside improvement, curiosity, even spirituality. It disguises itself as refinement. But beneath it is the same structure, the assumption that something essential is missing now and must be found later. That assumption fragments coherence. It keeps attention split between what is and what should be. When recognition stabilizes, that split closes. There is no longer a future state to reach. No version of yourself to become. No insight left to acquire. This does not create stagnation. It creates clarity. Movement continues, but it is no longer driven by lack. As the seeker dissolves, effort drops out of action. You still make decisions. You still engage with life. But there is no internal commentary pushing, correcting, or second-guessing every step. Action becomes direct. Clean. Unburdened by self-monitoring. This is when reality begins to reorder. Not dramatically, not all at once, but unmistakably. Situations resolve without force. Conversations shift tone. Opportunities appear without pursuit. What once required effort now unfolds with ease. This is not reward. It is resonance. When the seeker was active, reality mirrored seeking. It offered partial results, delays, and near misses. Not to frustrate, but to remain accurate. When seeking ends, the mirror updates. It reflects completion, coherence, and sufficiency. This reordering often feels anticlimactic. There is no grand arrival. No final confirmation. Just a growing sense that things are simpler than they used to be. Less charged. Less personal. Problems still appear, but they no longer define identity. They are addressed and pass. The absence of seeking does not eliminate desire. It eliminates desperation. Desire becomes preference rather than need. Direction remains, but it is not heavy. You move because movement is natural, not because you are trying to escape the present. This is also when trust deepens. Not trust in outcomes, but trust in responsiveness. You no longer need guarantees because you are no longer negotiating with reality. You are participating in it as it is. The mind may try to restart the seeker. It may look for something else to fix, optimize, or understand. That habit can persist for a while. But once recognition has stabilized, seeking feels unnecessary. Slightly absurd. Like knocking on a door you are already standing inside. Reality does not become perfect when the seeker dissolves. It becomes coherent. Events align with state. Timing synchronizes. Resistance fades. And life begins to feel less like a project and more like a process unfolding through you. Nothing mystical occurs here. Something practical does. The energy previously spent searching becomes available for living. And in that availability, reality responds with the same simplicity you have finally allowed yourself to inhabit. Nothing more needs to be added. Nothing needs to be practiced, repeated, or improved. What has unfolded through these moments is not a method, but a recognition. And recognition is the shift itself. From the beginning, the pattern has been consistent. Reality is not reacting to effort. It is reflecting coherence. Emotion is not noise. It is guidance. Control does not create movement. Allowing does. Time does not deliver outcomes. Presence does. Identity selects timelines. Stability collapses possibility. And consciousness was never separate from what it was trying to influence. Seen together, these are not separate teachings. They are facets of the same realization. That there was never anything outside of this moment deciding your experience. There was only the clarity or distortion of recognition within it. This is why nothing dramatic needs to happen now. No surge of certainty. No emotional peak. No promise of permanent clarity. The shift is quieter than that. It is the absence of tension where tension once lived. It is the sense that nothing is being withheld anymore. That nothing essential is missing. When recognition stabilizes, the need to check whether it is working disappears. You are no longer trying to generate change. You are noticing how change responds naturally when interference ends. This is not passivity. It is accuracy. The mind may still look for something to do. It may try to turn this recognition into a concept, a philosophy, a structure to maintain. That is habit, not necessity. Nothing breaks if the mind continues to function. It simply no longer needs to be obeyed. What matters now is not remembering every idea, but embodying the simplicity underneath them. Not trying to stay aligned, but noticing when you stop arguing with what is. Not trying to hold awareness, but noticing that awareness was never absent. From this place, life does not become perfect. It becomes responsive. Feedback arrives faster. Resistance dissolves sooner. Patterns reveal themselves without drama. The field does what it has always done. It mirrors the most coherent signal available. And now, that signal is quieter. You are no longer seeking control over reality. You are no longer waiting for permission. You are no longer preparing for a future moment where things finally begin. This moment is already complete enough to respond. This recognition does not make you special. It makes you present. And presence is the only place where creation ever happens. There is nothing to hold on to here. Nothing to protect. Nothing to prove. Just a subtle understanding that what you are has never been separate from what you are experiencing. This is not the end of a process. It is the end of postponement. Subscribe and share this with someone who needs to hear it before their timeline closes.